Hey everybody, welcome to the video, welcome to the channel. My name is Mike and today we're starting on a new project. To start taking some of the logs we've got drug up here, throw them onto my friend's Woodland Mills HM 122 and start working through our cut list for the new chicken coop / goat barn. So that's what we're working on. Good news is I've got all the mess cleaned up from when we did the timber bridge project. Now we're cleaned up from the timber bridge project. This should give us plenty of room to kind of lay everything out. We're going to try to mill all the posts, all the structure, and all the siding as well ourselves. That's kind of the goal. We recently did a pond build or pond expansion, repaired a pond that we built. The first time we built it, it didn't go very well, but the second time, so far so good. We'll go down and take a look at it later on in the video. We have had some rain. Anyway, we had to clear several trees during that pond build. And we're going to be using those trees from that pond build to mill up. So I mentioned this was not our mill. It is actually our friend Clint's mill. He was nice enough to let us borrow this for a couple months. And the whole purpose to this is we've been researching entry-level mills like a Woodland Mills HM122 or a Wood-Mizer LX25 for some time now. And it all revolves around cost savings for the property. And then, of course, lumber prices went absolutely insane, and we started digging into that research a little bit more. So the whole purpose is we want to find out, will we actually save money if we have a mill? Is it worth the investment and worth the time? Or should we just go to the local sawmill and buy our hardwood that way? With that being said, this video covers 2 weekends and 2 weeks worth of evenings trying to get as much milled up as possible. And what I learned pretty quickly is there's a lot more to milling than just milling. There is an immense amount of time in setting up and realigning and making sure everything's ready to go to get good, even, straight boards. Now obviously this is a pretty temporary setup on some cross members I've laid down. And if you had a more permanent setup, there'd be less time in this. But I did have to go through pretty frequently, about every 3 logs, and readjust the feet on this. So that is all lined up and ready to go. Next thing I want to do is get my water tank ready and make sure we're going there. And there's a couple things I'm not super fond of on this mill setup, and this is one of them. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. Get you a little closer maybe. So this is the vent tube, obviously. Water comes down, runs through here. Now this is kind of a cool system. The water only flows when you pull the throttle. This little paddle switch, whatever you want to call it, this little linkage is attached to the throttle. So when you run the throttle, in theory, the water's supposed to come out. See how it's not? Well, it turns out it's a vent issue with this vent pipe. I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now don't make fun of me too hard here. I got the cap off so it'll flow out of here. Can you see all the sawdust and stuff that comes out with it? There went some big chunks. When the vent pipe is up, it sits like this, and just not a lot, but enough sawdust falls down in here that it clogs up this elbow, and the tank can't vent, and then your water won't flow. Probably be a simple fix. You could put it up here and maybe put a 90 on it or something like that. Maybe even, I don't know, can you loop a vent over like that and it still work effectively? Anyway, I'm going to get that cleaned out so it'll actually flow right, and then we'll get to going. In there that comes out. Do I need to take this whole thing off, I wonder? There's so much gunk in there that it won't even free flow out. The tank lid is off. The water can't even get out. It's crazy.
So hopefully we got her cleaned out enough now. She'll see the water coming out on the blade right there. Well, this blade's not in great shape, but we're going to run it and get the bark, get a cant turned with it at least before we trash it. But now when I hit that switch, water should come out. And there it goes. Way better than what it was doing. Okay.
So real life Mike was pretty caught up on that being a vent for the watering system. And even for the whole 2 weeks, I kept thinking that. After going through and looking at this after editing, I'm realizing that's probably just a sight glass, so you know how much water is actually in the tank. Regardless of what its purpose is, it still had the same problem. It would collect that sawdust, it would clog up that line or that valve, and it would slow down the water going to the saw. Now that doesn't seem like a big problem, but that is the lubricating system for that saw blade. And if you're not lubricating your saw blades, well, your saw blades don't last as long. And saw blades, which we'll talk about later in the video, are pretty daggone expensive. Not to mention the downtime every time I had to take that apart and clean it to make sure the system was working properly. A little bit later in the video, we're going to talk about the price or the cost per board foot. And board foot is a 1 foot by 1 foot square, 1 inch thick. It is pretty much the standard unit of measurement when talking price in the timber industry. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, and it'll give us a good idea of what it would have cost had we gone to purchase all of this timber instead of milling it ourselves. But before we get to that, we have to talk about the cost of the equipment itself. Like I said, this is an HM122, and when he purchased it, he got it with a bed extension, and it cost him right around $3,400 shipped to his door. So we'll go ahead and throw that up on the board there so we have that tally. Now there's other expenses as well. Obviously a chainsaw comes in pretty handy, but since we, and I would assume most homesteads already have one, I'm not going to include that in the running tally. But if you don't have one, obviously it's something you're going to need to consider. So out of this first log, we ended up with 74 board feet of timber. This is how much we have to recoup still.
So this is what we ended up with out of that one log. I have 6 1x12s there, so that's 6 foot of siding. And then I ended up with 3 of these 4x4s, and they turned out pretty nice. They're all pretty consistent. I'm pretty happy with them. How are you? Oh, you got a bunch of burrs on your nose there, bud. There you go. That's a little better. Got the orange collars on. It's hunting season. The main thing I'm trying to get at each log is the 4x4s, and then any siding I get out of that log, that's just kind of a bonus. I'm keeping track of it. Whenever we get down to it, whatever else we need, then we'll just cut regular cants and cut siding out of those cants. This blade's getting pretty close to needing replaced, putting a new one on there, but since we're getting ready to put a new cant on, and that log does have a little bit of mud on it, we'll go ahead and run this old blade, see if we can't get the cant turned first, and then put a fresh blade on. I have seen where guys will pressure wash the logs before they mill them, and that's a pretty good idea, but we don't have water over here at the barn, so we can't really do that. We'll just go ahead and use this older blade, get the nasty stuff off, and then when we get down to clean cant, we'll put a new blade on. I think as a part of morning maintenance or startup maintenance, you just need to take this off every morning and maybe stick an air nozzle in there and blow it out and clean that out and make sure that line's all clear. We seem to have her tuned in okay now. I mean, it is a sawmill. Sawdust is kind of part of the operation.
So let's talk the cost of blades real quick. Now, I purchased my blades from Woodland Mills themselves on their website. I bought 2 boxes of 5, so 10 blades total. And this is how much it cost. I just did a screenshot to show you guys. But whenever I did that, they also charged a $100 flat rate shipping fee, which seemed a bit outrageous at the time. Had I done some research, though, I would realize that there are lots of places you can get resharpened blades for less money, or on Wood-Miser's page, their blades that fit the Woodland Mills 122 are less expensive as well. Now, I've never used them, so I can't speak to their quality or that type of thing, but they were certainly less expensive. You add that to the running tally of how much this operation is costing. Now we have that much more to recoup. Later in the video, though, we'll talk about sharpeners for bandsaw blades and how that can save a little bit of money as well. At this point in time, we now have 133 board feet of timber.
$11 feet. I need some 9-foot stuff. And she's got a big old butt on her. Let's cut a foot off. We'll cut this big butt off. And then we'll see what we can get 9-foot wise. Maybe we can at least get 1 4x4 out of this.
It's worth mentioning, obviously these are all different species, and I've said that before and say it again later in the video, but I did not go through and figure out the board footage of each type of species. That just doesn't make sense. Unless I planned on selling this, I'm not going to spend the time doing that. I'm getting these numbers based on if I would have taken my trailer up to the sawmill and said, load me up with this amount of board footage, this amount of timber that I need for a barn, how much would I pay that place per board foot for the timber I was going to buy. Obviously, this is some type of hickory. It would probably go a little bit more per board foot, but we're basing this off of if I had to spend the money to actually buy it. Now, if you're going to mill this stuff up and sell it, obviously these numbers aren't going to apply to you. You can recoup some of this for selling the timber, but we're not selling this. We're building a barn out of it. Hopefully that all kind of makes sense.
Well, that's not great. Maybe we can maybe we can cut around it somehow. I don't know. We'll get it on the mill. I don't even think this log's gonna be worth my time to even try to get some siding out of. we'll just leave this one lay for now. I was gonna try to get some of my 8-foot 4x4s out of this one, but it's rotting right there, just like the other one was, obviously. Same cut. I'm gonna cut a couple feet. I'm gonna cut like to here. If I cut from here over and it's good, I can use the rest of that for siding and we'll use it there. If it's still rotting into here, I don't think I can use any of it. Definitely has a rotten spot there, but this is still pretty good wood. I'd say we put it on the mill and see if we can't maybe cut around it and get a little bit of siding out of it. I almost said flooring. That's not what we're making.
One thing I did try was to use my little cordless saw to clean up the bark where I was going to make each cut to try to make these bandsaw blades last.
So you can see where the rod is right here. Here's my plan. I'm just going to come down like this until I get into this rot. Once we get into this, we'll flip it over, and then I'll start running them this way until we get into that rot. Try to get as much as we can. Maybe I don't get crazy. Grab one there. No, not there. These at least though.
I cut the most that I could out of that log, but it did have quite a bit of rot in it. I ended up just rolling it up on its side like this, and then just cutting these out for stickers, trying to limit waste as much as possible. Later on in the video, I do end up, because of where we're getting the logs from later, we'll go down to the pond to get them, which means I'm driving past the house. I do end up driving past the house and using the pressure washer and start to pressure wash logs off at that point in time. And I did definitely notice a difference as far as longevity of the bandsaw blade goes, with getting through the bark and cutting through less mud. I did my best to go out and measure, take my cut list down, and try to pre-plan each log the best that I could to try to maximize the amount of timber I could get out of each cant. Now, also keep in mind, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I'm just kind of measuring these and guessing the best that I can, but it seemed to work all right. Another expense is a way to move the logs from the woods to the mill. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube videos with homemade log arches and homemade log winches, and all kinds of contraptions. Well, this contraption is mine. It's an old pipe dolly turned into a log arch, and an old Jeep frame that I turned into a log winch. Now, I made this to pull dead trees out of the woods for firewood. I didn't really make it for milling purposes, but it's made for moving logs, and that's what we need for the mill, so it works perfect. If it's something light, like this for firewood, and I don't care to drag it through the mud, I'll just hook it to the winch and pull it that way. But if it's a little bit heavier log that the tractor can't pull, or I want to keep it up out of the mud, then I'll use a log arch. Gets it off the ground for me, and makes it easier for the tractor to move. And if the log is big enough, I'll use the winch to actually disconnect the log arch as well, so that I don't do silly things like this. Not my smartest move, but it got the job done nonetheless. Now, this fabricating doesn't add a huge amount of expense. Most of this stuff for me was free or scrap or given to me. But it does add an immense amount of time. It adds onto that time factor. More time spent doing something that's not actually milling. Now, once it's done, so you have that going for you. And I did make a couple small modifications during this video. One of them was I always had a hard time getting that chain under the back side of the log. So I welded a piece of rebar onto the chain so I could shove that underneath the log and then go around, pull the rebar, and pull the chain underneath. It actually worked surprisingly well.
Not a welder by any means. In fact, I'm just kind of learning how to stick weld, but there you go. That's what you got this time around. So we got one more log down, which gave us another 4x4 and some more than 9-foot siding for the taller ends. This is actually after I got done doing the bush hogging for Mike and the trail maintenance. So we got to get the wappa choppa off and the log winch back on. And I bought some more accessories for the log winch, and then we'll go get another one and see how far that gets us. I did say I wanted to mount a toolbox right here. I got one. When I say I got one, I mean I had this one laying around the basement, so that's what we're going to use. Ammo cans or metal things probably work better, but this is what I have, which means it fits the budget. I spent enough money on the hooks and stuff for the chain sections that I picked up as well. That's my fingers. So I picked up another snatch block, or change of direction, whatever you want to call it. So now I got 2 of those in there. Clevis can stay in there. Short section chain with a chain hook and an open J hook like that, with a slip J hook type style and chain hook on one end. And then we've got this set up right here, and you'll see exactly how I use this. And this little fella. And there should be enough room that we can easily tuck a toe strap in as well. Now, I'm not worried about latching this. If it latches, look at that, it does. I'll probably just drill a bunch of holes in the bottom, to be honest. And if she gets wet, she gets wet. Okay.
I will say, though, after all the modifications and after purchasing all the chain attachments and the snatch blocks and everything I need, I do absolutely love it, even with the wireless remote as well. It makes it so easy. It takes me probably less than 3 or 4 minutes to get a good-sized log on that tractor. Look how happy I am. That's amazing. This is only a John Deere 755, which is a 20-horse compact utility tractor, and we're pulling some pretty good-sized timber in a pretty controlled manner.
So it's the following morning, and we're getting ready to change that to another blade, and we're still on the discussion of is it really worth it? I think it's going to come down to how you value your time, but so we have a good metric on how much time it actually takes. Let's start the clock, and let's try this. It is on my broken phone screen. It's 9:52 right now. We're going to take the tractor, we're going to go get a log, bring it up here, we're going to mill it up, see how many board feet we get out of that log milled, and we'll see how long that actually takes us. I'm going to include putting the new blade on because that's kind of part of milling. And here in a little bit, we're going to see if we can rig up our chainsaw sharpener to sharpen a few blades, because I bought 10 blades and we're getting ready to put our last one on. And we'll talk about the cost of blades here in just a minute too. I'm sure editing Mike will take care of us on that. All right, time's ticking. Let's go. Let's see what this takes.
Editing Mike certainly will. He will remind you we already talked about the price of blades, but we have yet to talk about the price of blade sharpeners, and we will later on, because I am going to try to rig up that little Harbor Freight chainsaw sharpener to sharpen the blades on the bandsaws. I don't know why that's so difficult to say, but you guys get the idea. This is a poplar log, by the way. It was the only poplar log I had down. Like I said, everything else was hickories and oaks. And in the world of hardwoods, poplars are actually pretty daggone soft, and they cut up, they mill up pretty quickly. When it was all said and done, when we got this on the mill, we got everything cut down. I was able to get quite a bit of siding out of it. I didn't cut any 4x4 posts out of the poplar. I just cut nothing but siding out of it. And we ended up with around 162 board feet. Take that times the price that we'd have to pay if we were going to buy a board foot of poplar. And this is how much that would have been worth. Take it off our total running tab. You guys get the idea. We still got a little ways to go. You can see, though, look how much that poplar pulls when you cut it. And I know that has to do with my sawing technique. I'm just 100% convinced of that. But it's always interesting to watch in these time lapse the way the log reacts during the cut.
So it's 2:44 now, and I lost my microphone again. It'll turn up. It always seems to turn up. Take about an hour out of that for total milling time. I sold my little pull-behind finish mower, and just kind of got talking to the guy, got him loaded up, and that kind of thing. So take about an hour out of that. But that's how long it took to mill up those 2 logs. And at the very end, we'll tally up. Had we went and bought that, what it would have cost, and then kind of divide our whole time by that and see what the per hour would be. So we have those hard numbers, because I think that's going to be the biggest debate with somebody. The internal debate is, what is your time worth? I think that's going to be the deal breaker of whether or not it's actually worth it to have a mill and mill your own timber. Another thing that you definitely have to consider as far as the cost of milling is blades. Let's go over here and talk about that.
So I ended up with this super fancy and technical setup with 2 5-gallon buckets of hydraulic oil, an old rough cut piece of timber, and then a Harbor Freight Chicago Electric chainsaw chain sharpener that I took some pieces off so it would just ride down through the guardrails. It took some time. It took a little bit of practice and some research on YouTube, but eventually I got the hang of it. And we'll put it on the bandsaw mill and we'll try it out.
So I got time for one cut real quick. I already cut 2 sides off with the old blade. I'm trying to get this cant turned for 3 more 4x4s. And we've got the homemade sharpened blade on there. Let's test it. Let's see what happens.
Now, pretty much every manufacturer of bandsaw mills makes their own version of a bandsaw blade sharpener as well. They are fairly expensive, but after looking at the cost that we paid for the blades, probably worth the investment if you plan on having the mill for any length of time. According to Woodland Mills on their website, their blades can be sharpened up to 5 times. Well, it doesn't take long to see that if you do plan on keeping it for several years, which I would think most of us would, a blade sharpener would add up in some savings pretty quickly. Now, luckily for us, there's actually a guy in the county we live in that resharpens blades, actually just down the road from Clint. So all the blades that I ended up using, I sent home with Clint so he can go have resharpened.
So definitely was not as fast as a factory sharpened blade, but pretty good even planed cut. And this is hickory, which saws pretty hard. It definitely has more noise, chatter, marks, whatever you want to call it, than a factory blade. And that's probably because we're not going to the exact same pitch every time. We're just kind of rigging up a Chicago Electric chainsaw sharpener to do the job. But it definitely cut better than a used blade.
And just because I had a few things left over after I cut all the big logs down from the lake, I decided to go ahead and try some of these smaller pieces. I was just curious if it felt like it was worth my time or not, and actually ended up with some decent boards out of these. And when I say I tried some short logs, I tried some short logs. I think this next one, if real life Mike would get out of the way for just a second. There, you got her down there. Looks good. Nice job. This one was 43 inches long, but I'll probably use some of these boards whenever we build the 12x24 chicken coop / goat barn. There's no doubt about it. So this is what we ended up with. I want to start this off with a huge thanks to Clint. If you want to go check out his channel, which has absolutely nothing to do with sawmilling, it is him and his son working on cars. It's called CB Yoda's. Hop over there and tell him thanks for letting us borrow the mill. I'll put a link in the description. I also want to thank Logger Wade. Link in the description for Logger Wade's channel as well. He answered a bunch of texts and phone calls and gave me a crash course in lumber pricing. It's 1,000 times more complicated than I ever thought it would be, and I have a lot to learn as far as that aspect goes. We ended up with about 500 board feet of timber. I got all the 4x4s and about 3/4 worth of the siding done, which means we'll end up going out to Logger Wade's at some point in the future whenever we're building the barn to buy the rest of the siding so we can get that experience as well and kind of have both sides of the story here. As far as is a sawmill worth it? For our homestead, I don't think it is. If you've got a lot of projects coming up and you can get enough timber milled that you're going to recoup that money, obviously it makes sense. If you have a lot of timber that you can mill up and you can sell to try to recoup some of that money, obviously that makes sense. For us, we have the barn coming up and the shelter house, and I just don't see a need on our homestead to have our own bandsaw mill. What I do see a need for is to get back to work on the YouTube yacht. This is what it looks like from the sky, if you guys ever wondered. Luckily, YouTube revenue's been doing okay, and we will be pouring that concrete floor very, very soon. Probably within the next week or so, which I'm very excited about. Also, here's a little flyover of the pond, and I know we could fly over the trees to get down to the pond, but you know how I am with drones. I like to go through the trees. I think it's more fun, and then we'll hit the river. Now, if you want more information on the actual Woodland Mills HM122, I'm going to do a full-on review video of that as well. I did a review video on it before Clint ended up taking the sawmill back, and I'll hopefully have that posted either this week or later next week. It'll be way more in-depth on the actual mill itself, how it works, things to look out for on it, things I like, things I don't like, that type of thing. And then, of course, some stuff coming for Dirt Perfect as well. See? Through the trees. No problem at all. Pond is looking great. Filling up a little bit at a time. We haven't really had a lot of rain, but it's filling up nice. Of course, the bell tower looking great sitting there as well. I hope you guys are enjoying the channel. I hope this video made sense. I don't know. I feel like I had more to that thought, but I really don't. I do appreciate you guys watching. I really, truly do mean that. We do have some more partnerships coming up soon in the next few weeks. Keep in mind those partnerships help pay for a lot of this content that we do, specifically the YouTube yacht, so we can get back working on that. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.